Nami, that was very, very beautiful and informing. And one connection that we're making with what you just talked about is the reverence for Antarctica, and also that we have to work together because we are on the same planet and we need to work together. And so all of those values that you talked about are part of what scientists and other people are trying to do when they go down to the ice. So let me just do one setting here. There we go. All right, so we also want to talk about the rights of Antarctica, because Antarctica was the first protected continent, and it's actually the only protected continent. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the history and the Antarctic Treaty, and then Ted is going to talk about climate and some of the science that's happening on the continent. I'm just going to do a timer here so we know, because we're going to trade off. So the Antarctic Treaty in the early 20th century to mid 20th century came about because countries were going down and staking claims. And then they figured out that Antarctica is so beautiful and very special that they came together. It took a lot of negotiating for about a year to decide that they would set aside their claims and come together and make a treaty for peaceful science, no military, for having protected areas, places where no humans can go, no science can happen, and also no mining or dumping of waste, particularly nuclear waste. So when you go down there, you bring what you used back with you. And then 12 countries decided in 1959, which took place in 1960, and now there are 55 countries. So it was a groundbreaking. So we know that we can protect the planet because we've had this experience. And then the Montreal Protocol is a treaty that's in existence now where all countries have signed. And that was to protect the ozone layer from CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons, the chemicals used for refrigerants, found to be harmful. And so now the ozone layer is being repaired slowly because of the ban on these chemicals. And then it took a long time to have a modern map of Antarctica. There's word that there were some ancient maps and people not sure how those were mapped, but there is one in existence. But in 1971, the first map was created. And then we found out that 10 years before, the CIA actually had a map. But now in 2018, we have the best digital map from satellite images, and been a combination of scientists and a satellite company created a map, and you see that here. And the phrase is, it was like putting on glasses. So you see 2020, now you can see everything down to the size of a house in Antarctica. So this is Google Maps now uses this. So the important thing, I think, is that we carry around a reminder of Antarctica and how important it is, and therefore how important the planet is. So if you hold your thumb up like this picture in front of you, if you hold your left hand up, you'll see the picture is the same, but I'll hold mine this way. All right, so you've got your thumb for the peninsula, which is the fastest melting area right now of Antarctica. You have your East Antarctica, which is the mountains here, and the fleshy part is the West Antarctica. So I like to be reminded, not only is it a map if I were to get lost if I was down there, but it is a reminder that we are part of the Earth and that we actually are carrying a part of the Earth with us. So I wonder if you know what major coastline was the last to be mapped on Earth. You can probably guess it was in Antarctica. And Admiral Richard E. Byrd was the first person to fly over the South Pole and the North Pole. And he was a very famous explorer that also helped the Antarctic Treaty get formed. And this is one of the planes he used, the Barclay Grow, that was on the ship, which I'll tell you more about that. But basically, they sailed down and used the plane as well, not just ships. So what he was doing was he wanted to beat Captain Cook's record. Most of us have heard of Captain Cook. And in 1774, Cook went down, and this red dot is as far down as he had gotten, and said it was a dreadful place. No one will ever go there. It's impossible to get here. It's cold, it's frigid, so please don't bother. And we actually think that he didn't want to be sent back down, so he made sure to tell people how horrible it is so that he didn't have to go again. You can imagine sailing all the way around the world and then to find this. And so then part of the story is that my father, 160 years later, served with Admiral Byrd, and they ended up going more south of that spot, close to that spot, and then taking the plane and flying to see more of the coastline and mapping things that people hadn't seen before. So my father was George W. Gibbs Jr., and he ended up to be the first Black man in the world to set foot on the continent. So there's a picture of him. He wrote every day on the ship. And as Nami was talking about, people taking care of each other, there were 2 ships, 125 men and 80 dogs as part of this expedition. And they took great care of each other. It was a very successful trip, and they had a lot of science and a lot of discovery of Antarctica. This is what it was like to be there aboard the ship, and they didn't see land or people or buildings from late November 1939 until late March of 1940. They landed in Chile, and they were stuck in the ice over 3 times. And the other ship, the North Star, went back to Argentina to get supplies because they thought maybe they would be stuck in the ice for another year. So this is the route, and it was very, very treacherous. So the dark line is where the bear stayed as it was sailing, and then the dotted line was where the ship where the plane went, the Barclay Grow. They were there to build bases. So this is the west base, which is fairly easy to build. And the east base was a little more difficult, and get them out and evacuate was even more difficult. So not only did they do great science, probably a dozen different kinds of science that they had. For example, geology, meteorology, glaciology, biology. Wind chill was formulated there. So there's lots of great science, and also a lot of discovery of land that had not been seen before. It was also a secret mission because the Germans were going down right before World War II, and so they were wondering what they might be doing. And then the important thing, the connection we're talking today about Thwaits Glacier, and at that time, it was completely unknown, and it was sighted for the first time from the plane that I showed you on February 24th, 1940. The Walgreen Coast is a part of Thwaits Glacier now. We're going to tell you a little bit more about that. So the bases, so half of the people were there as civilians going down to the ice, doing the science and the exploration. The other half of the people were building the bases. They were military and making sure that everything was safe for the people who were staying for a year. So they built the buildings and then had the ventilation, making sure it was safe to live underground. And then once they were underground, because the buildings then were covered with snow, they dug tunnels and created more rooms for living quarters. And then, of course, the famous emperor penguins were also there. We want to still watch to make sure they're still protected. They're important animals. And then this is what it looked like when they built it, but this was the other base. So East Base was above ground and is still standing. It's now a museum. And then the West Base floated away, and I think it was 1961 on an iceberg. So you can get a sense of, they really created a town for them to live on. And it also connected to the previous presentation talking about Indigenous values and people that we want to make sure they have rights and they're included in society. So there were a group of boats that came to the Bear. And this man, originally they called them Alakalufe Indian tribe. They're now Kawascar. There's less than 50 people remaining since the 1970s. My father was very touched to be able to meet Indigenous people in person and give them food and clothing. That's what they were asking for. And in exchange, they gave them a dog, a little puppy. But it was just a very friendly, amazing time. And my father did all this before he had a family. So I just know a few stories. I don't really know this story. I have done the research to sort of collect what happened. But I think that the values that I got from that experience was, first of all, good connection to Latin America. He had tons of pictures of Chile and Brazil and Argentina. So I had a fondness for Latin America, even though I didn't go until I went to Antarctica. And then I also found these in his files. So again, this international, a couple of themes that if you have the ability to travel, that it does expand your mind and your knowledge, be able to see different parts of the planet, to connect with different kinds of people. And he was fortunate in the Navy for 24 years that he did see the world. And this was in these clippings in his files of how the Chilean people embraced the crew of the Bear. They were all like rock stars. And you may or may not know about Jim Crow, which happened in the 30s and 40s and 50s in the United States, where there was segregation and white people and Black people legally couldn't be in the same room or on the bus together. Had to sit in the back of the bus if you were Black, for example. So he was there in Antarctica doing this expedition at this time, and so realized that other parts of the world didn't have segregation. And so he became a great leader because he was treated very well during the early days when he was 22 years old. And the last thing I wanted to say is to remember that we are causing greenhouse gases and things that are harmful to the planet, and therefore the planet is heating up. And also to remember that the Earth is also changing on her own, if I can use female pronouns for the Earth. And on this expedition, they wanted to see magnetic South Pole. Admiral Byrd, that was one of the goals, but they could only get about 200 miles from there. But since then, magnetic South Pole has continued to move. So there are some mysteries about the Earth that we still are trying to figure out from scientific perspective what's happening. So I'll turn it over to Ted now.
Yeah, hi. Hi, I'm Ted Scambos, and I want to talk a little bit about how, even though Antarctica is protected by the Antarctic Treaty from direct impact, by humans. When we go there and we conduct research, we are mandated not to have a big influence on the continent, to keep it as clean and pristine as possible. But unfortunately, even though it is a protected continent, and you can view that environmentally as the continent having the rights, sharing in the rights of nature, unfortunately, because of activities elsewhere by human beings, we're having an impact on the Antarctic continent in terms of global warming and changes in the ice sheet that are leading to sea level rise. And one of the most important areas for this sort of change is Thwaits Glacier, which is located, if you've got your handy map of Antarctica, it's located right about here at the base of your thumb on your map. And you can see it's highlighted right there on this map of elevation change in Antarctica. So this map is colored by what areas are becoming lower in elevation or higher in elevation due to additional snowfall. The areas that are red are places that are losing ice. Because they're losing ice, they're contributing to sea level rise. And if you look at the scale below the map, you can see that even though there are areas that are gaining mass, and they're quite extensive, the scale for that additional snow, that additional ice, is quite a bit smaller than the scale for the loss of ice near many places on the coast. The total loss is about 150 billion tons per year for all of Antarctica. That's contributing about 1/3 of a millimeter to sea level rise each year, but we're quite concerned that that number could go up as the impact of global warming increases. You can take the next slide. Advance, please. Okay. I think there's
다음 슬라이드 해주세요.
Yeah, it looks like she's losing about 150 billion tons a year, or about 1/3, a little bit more than 1/3 of a millimeter each year, contributing to sea level rise. Well, Thwaits Glacier is in an unusual spot in Antarctica. It's in an area that's quite central to the West Antarctic ice sheet. Antarctica is divided into two main areas. One, the peninsula, the other one, one is the peninsula in West Antarctica, which is sort of your thumb and the base of your thumb. And then the area of East Antarctica, much larger, but also much colder and more stable. Well, Thwaits Glacier lies over an area of bedrock that's quite deep, well below sea level. And in fact, in the past, it was part of the ocean, not covered by ice. And this is a concern because it indicates that Thwaits Glacier is quite vulnerable, susceptible to change due to a warming climate. This is a compilation of all of the processes that are involved in controlling this large mass of ice that might eventually collapse and contribute a great deal of ice to the ocean. The main issue, though, is that warm ocean water that usually remains at depth off the coast of Antarctica is being induced by changing winds around Antarctica to come up onto the continental shelf, flow down channels in the continental shelf rock to the point where the glacier just goes afloat as it comes off of the continent. So the ice is flowing from left to right. As it reaches the point where it goes afloat and contacts the ocean water there now is quite a bit warmer than it used to be. And because of that, it melts at the base of the ice sheet. The melting allows the ice to flow out faster. It slips out faster and draws the ice sheet down because the pace of ice flow off of the continent is faster than the amount of snowfall that falls on the continent to replace it. And so what we're seeing is a change in how the ice sheet mass balance, how the ice sheet interacts with the ocean and with the atmosphere. This has been going on for several decades, and we're quite concerned that there's a possibility of it becoming a runaway process in which it accelerates, and as it accelerates, the impact of that warmer water and the thinning of the ice becomes greater and greater, so that you get a faster and faster retreat. This movie here shows this part of the coastline. You can see the red star in the map in the upper right, shows you where Thwaits Glacier is. and the orientation now is for the coast to be down and to the left. I'll start the movie and you can see how Thwaits Glacier is coming apart as the years go by. The bottom of the image shows much faster retreat because there the process of retreat has gone further, and there's no obstructing ice in the way of flow off of the continent. The continent is to the upper right, the ocean is to the left side. The area in the center of the picture with the two X's on it is being supported partially by this large island area of bedrock and ice that's bracing some of this ice trying to come off the continent. We think that this area is about to break apart completely, and that this part of the ice sheet will begin to flow more rapidly and contribute to sea level rise at a faster pace. So why are these changes happening in this area? It has to do with changes in the winds around Antarctica. They're affecting the surface of the ocean, and because the surface of the ocean is being pushed in different directions at a different rate than it used to be, the deeper ocean is moving also to replace areas where surface water is being pushed away from the continent. Deeper water is approaching the continent more easily than it did before, more frequently than it did before, and causing this melting process that I mentioned before. And the deep areas well below the surface, where Antarctic ice flows out and contacts the ocean, that's where we're having this issue. So it's not surface warming and surface melting that is the biggest problem in Antarctica. Many parts of the world are experiencing warmer air temperatures, and Antarctica is as well. But those temperatures are not reaching the point of melting over most of the surface of Antarctica. Instead, it's because winds are affecting the ocean. That's what's causing the ice to melt more rapidly at depth. Contact with warm water in the ocean, that's leading to the mass loss of the continent. So because of this process, there's a lot of concern about just how fast sea level rise might progress over the course of this century. And that's indicated in this map here. All of those colored solid lines in this graphic indicate what models suggest will be the total sea level rise by the end of this century. But that dotted line indicates the concern associated with Antarctica and other parts of the ice sheet, not just Thwaits Glacier by itself, but other parts of Antarctica and other ice sheets such as Greenland, could lead to a much more rapid rise in sea level by the end of the century, up to almost a meter additional sea level rise if this process takes hold rapidly and aggressively in terms of causing the ice to retreat. This is, of course, a great concern, and as a result, the US and the UK have undertaken a major project to explore and understand Thwaits Glacier called the International Thwaits Glacier Collaboration. So it's a long way to go. We've been talking quite a bit about a lot of different aspects of the rights of nature. As Leilani pointed out, the Antarctic Treaty has secured the rights of this part of nature, the Antarctica, and yet we're still having an impact that we don't wish to have, and in fact has negative consequences for us, for humanity. And if we're going to protect nature, we need to understand nature better. That's the objective of the International Thwaits Glacier Collaboration. And we are increasing our understanding. It doesn't solve the problem. That takes all of us making a decision to change how we affect the atmosphere and how the atmosphere in turn is affecting the rest of the planet. And I'll turn it back over to Leilani now to summarize.
Are you got the slide? Can you show the one more slide?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Sorry, my computer decided to turn off. So I wrote The Call of Antarctica to share about my father's experiences and also to give people the history of Antarctica and the climate and the science. Ted did the foreword and was my consultant, particularly on the science. He's been there many times. I've been there once. And he didn't say, but he's the co-leader of this ITGC organization. Very powerful group of scientists wanting to make a difference. And one of the things that we'd like to do in terms of outreach with ITGC, because I'm also helping them and consulting with them as a leadership consultant and diversity consultant, diversity, equity, inclusion. So we want to make sure that we're including those voices that are underserved. So Black and Brown and Indigenous communities around the world, to inspire them to consider a career in earth and polar sciences. And this book is very accessible. It's for 14 to 24-year-old young adults. Everybody likes it. It's been well received, and it gives you some of the pictures we've shown you in this presentation are also in the book. So please reach out. Thank you.